fellow Falcoholics. What is up? Welcome to another episode of the Falcoholic podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, here to bring you what I know everyone has been craving now that the offseason is here, a deep math primer into how much cap space the Falcons will have at their disposal in 2023. This is a much more exciting show than last year's version, for those of you that remember that, where we were sort of pulling out all the stops to figure out how they could sign a roster and how they could make things work with some creative extensions and cuts and trades and things of that nature, some of which did come to fruition, some of which didn't, some of which surprised us, like the Calvin Ridley suspension that really threw a wrench into everything. This year, the Falcons just have a lot more money at their disposal. That's what we're going to get into, how much they have. We're going to break down sort of how all this stuff is calculated a little bit too, and show you guys how sort of the inner workings of the cap function and how we arrive at some of these numbers, as well as going over some potential cap casualties, players that could be cut to save cap space. I'm sure you know the main one already, but there is one more player that could be cut to save significant money for the Falcons that they could go with, they could go in that direction. We'll also look at the priority re-signings for the Falcons, because that is a potential group that could take up a lot of the Falcons' available cap space. I'm not sure everyone's factoring in all of those players into their calculations, so we'll get to all that stuff today. We'll break it down in an efficient manner, as efficient as we can. It's a lot to get to, but we'll try to get through it here in the next 20 to 30 minutes or so on the Falcoholic podcast. Before we take off, do want to remind folks to please leave us that 5-star review if you're listening to the podcast audio. We really do appreciate that. If you're watching on YouTube, you will get some graphics that break down the numbers for you. So if you want that and you're listening to the audio, just pull it up on YouTube to actually see the numbers in detail there. But if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe as well. You can also contribute to our Senior Bowl fund, as you can see right there at the bottom. It is well underway. We've got about 21 days until the Senior Bowl kicks off here. And every little bit helps the coverage. So thank you guys so much for everyone who has already contributed to that. If you're so inclined, you can do so by going to streamlabs.com/thefalcoholic/tip. You can leave a question there as well. We will get to that on the next live show, or you can do it on my Venmo, which is linked to my Twitter account at FalcoholicKevin. Again, guys, thank you so much for that. And let's dive right in to the Falcons cap space discussion here on the Falcoholic podcast. So the first graphic we're going to look at is the overall cap space calculation here for the Falcons. So the numbers you're going to notice right off the bat, the base salary cap is the first thing that we're going to be working with. And to be clear, this has not been decided. This is a number that is agreed upon by the NFL and the NFLPA. It's based on the revenue sharing split that all 32 teams have. All 32 teams will have the same base salary cap. Right now, pretty much every site is using the $225 million number, including Over the Cap, which is where I'm going to be pulling these numbers from. Hat tip to them. It's a great resource for everyone looking to get information on cap space. Spotrac is another one that's a good resource as well. They sometimes have a little bit of a different number, so it's always interesting to look at both of them. So right now we're working with a base salary cap of $225 million. So that's the total amount you can spend on your roster and on dead money from contracts that you moved on from. There was a report a couple of weeks back from Richard Sherman, who is on the NFLPA board, by the way, that they were planning more like a $228 million base salary cap. So if they go for that, or if they go for something higher, these numbers actually could go up, so that you could have a little bit more cap at your disposal. But as of right now, there's no talk of it going down from that 225 estimate. So these numbers that we're going to be working with today are based on the 225 number, but it could go up a little bit, 3-5 million, we'll see. And that just would help things even more. So that's just extra money that the Falcons could have. So it's something to keep in mind. Right now, the Falcons' active cap spending for 2023. So what that means, this is how much money they're spending on the active roster. Right now, they're spending $155.14 million. I'm rounding a lot of these smaller numbers up to 2 decimal points just to keep things more concise. So you're welcome. Now, I want everyone to realize why, and you look at these numbers, and we'll get to it. The Falcons have signed 18 players to futures contracts, so that's why these numbers probably look a little bit smaller than you might have expected based on what the numbers were quoted in the offseason. Bear with me here. This is normal. This is natural part of building the roster in the offseason. So we'll get there. Trust me. Dead money right now. Falcons only working with $13.09 million. That number is likely to go up if they do make some cap cuts, but the savings will be worth it. Notably, I think about $70 million less than they were working with this year in terms of dead money. So obviously a much healthier dead money situation for the Falcons. So you take the active cap spending and the dead money and you subtract that from the base salary cap. And right now the Falcons are working with about $61.78 million in total cap space for 2023. There are some other numbers baked into that, like rollover from 2022 and stuff like that. I'm not going to break that down in as much detail here. You could go to Over the Cap. You can go to Spotrac if you want to see that numbers in detail. But end of the day, the number that you're looking at right now in terms of total cap space the Falcons have at their disposal at this very moment for 2023, about $61.78 million, which is a lot. It's the second most in the NFL. It's a ton. So that's a very good place to be at this point in the offseason, especially considering, like I said, that the Falcons did sign another 18 players to their roster on futures contracts, ranging in price from like a little over $1 million to $750,000, give or take. And what that has done for the Falcons has actually put them over 51 players, and that's important because we get into the top 51 rule, which means that now anytime the Falcons sign a player, only the top 51 most expensive contracts count against the salary cap in the offseason. So when the Falcons sign a new player, you would if the player's more expensive than the 51st contract, then you would subtract the amount of the 51st contract from that more expensive player's contract to get their actual salary cap hit, because that other contract is falling below the line and no longer counting. If the player is cheaper than the 51st contract, they don't count at all. So they're essentially free. Last year, there was like a little bit of math needed for the Falcons to even get to that 51 number before those contracts started falling off. At this point, they've already got, I think they're at 57 or 58 players at this time. So they're already way ahead of that. I think the Falcons actually have the second most players under contract in the NFL right now for 2023 as well. So we're a far cry from 2022 roster math, barely getting under the cap here. One more number we need to calculate as a part of this is that the Falcons will need to sign their rookies, right? Obviously, we don't know exactly which picks they will get. I mean, we have a good idea of what picks they have now, but if they make trades, if they swap players or do whatever, that could change. But as of right now, it's estimated that the Falcons will need a little over $5 million to actually sign the rookie class. That's $5.13 million. So you subtract that from their total cap space to get a number that the sites refer to as effective cap space, and that's basically how much money you actually have to spend, and that's $56.65 million, which again is really good. It's very high. It's a lot of money, especially for a team that already has more than enough players on the roster. Now, 18 of those players were futures contracts guys, and not all those guys are going to make the team. A lot of them were practice squad players, but the Falcons already, essentially have 53 players or more, so they don't necessarily need to go out and sign a bunch more players to field a roster, so they can potentially use this cap space to sign some more expensive free agents. So the next graphic we're going to look at here is the potential savings that the Falcons could get, right? So some potential salary cap cuts, casualties. The first one you'll all be familiar with. It's quarterback Marcus Mariota. No longer the starter, was benched this season. And he's probably not coming back based on all that's happened since he was benched. And the other reason is that the Falcons saved $12 million straight up in cap savings with only a 2.5 dead money hit on that deal. And so everyone knows the cap savings takes into account the dead money. So the net savings is still $12 million overall, even including that dead money. So that's a no-brainer. The Falcons are going to release Marcus Mariota. Maybe he comes back. Maybe he doesn't. Probably not at this point. But That's sort of a no-brainer. The other guy that unfortunately could be on the chopping block this offseason is cornerback Casey Hayward. Ended up missing half the season with his injury. He is making $7 million this year, which I think if he was healthy and playing at a high level, you'd keep him around because the Falcons need cornerback help. They do. But right now, as it stands, he's a $1 million cap savings with just $2 million in dead money. And he's going to be, I think, 34 this year, and the Falcons have a lot of cap space to potentially go sign somebody else that might be at a similar price point, but not necessarily have the injury concern or the age concern. So it's seeming more and more likely that that's going to be the route they take, but he could be back. And again, it's only a $5 million savings, and the Falcons clearly have enough money, so they may or may not do it. But so far, these are the two guys that I'm counting as potential cuts for the calculations in today's show. And if the Falcons make those two moves, they clear up another $17 million in salary cap space, which is, again, that's a nice chunk of money as well. So you make those two moves. There are a few other players that you could get some savings from. Cordarrelle Patterson is the only other guy I think above $2.5 million in savings. I sort of doubt that they would do it. They don't really save that much money net. And Cordarrelle Patterson's a good player. Also sort of a fan favorite. Just doesn't seem worth it to me when they're not really in financial trouble anymore. So I don't think they're going to make that. And everybody else is sort of $1 million or less in cap savings. Some of those cuts will happen probably, in training camp and things like that. So there's the opportunity to clear up a little bit more money here and there if they want to carry some extra space into the season. But for the most part, these are the two main guys that we're going to be looking at. So if the Falcons do make those moves, and get the $17 million in cap savings from the cuts, they will now be sitting at a potential cap base number of $73.65 million, which is very good, obviously. And that now takes into account their rookies being signed and the potential cuts that they're likely to make going into the season. So this now sets them up with the rest of this money essentially being available for them to sign free agents. But before we get into external free agents, we probably want to look at the guys that they're likely to re-sign in-house. And those guys, for the record, I do have a list of them here, the ones that I would consider priority free agents, not necessarily all terribly expensive guys, but guys that I would personally re-sign. And it's actually a pretty big list. So these are guys that you want to, and these are numbers you want to take into account when you're doing your calculations as well. So Chris Lindstrom, the first one we're going to talk about, he's not actually a free agent. So the Falcons don't need to extend him. He's still on his 5th-year option, but I think it would be advantageous for them to extend him now. They could potentially use the extension to actually lower his cap hit, which going into this season I think is over $13 million. They don't necessarily need to, but they could. But as of right now, I'm sort of assuming a $20 million cap hit for Lindstrom on an extension because I think that's likely to happen. Now, since he's already making over $13 million, he doesn't actually cost the full $20 million against the cap extra. He costs about $7 million extra or whatever, so that's factored into the numbers already. But I do think they will extend Lindstrom. Kaleb McGary is the one that's actually the free agent. And there's been a lot of talk about maybe he'll be franchise tagged, in which case he's going to cost a little over $18 million on the offensive line franchise tag. I think if they were to extend him, he's probably going to get a little less than that per year. Right now, I'm sort of estimating around $17 million, but you never know with free agency. It could be crazy. It could be more. He could not come back at all. But the big ticket guy right now is Kaleb McGary. So we'll see if they do end up going that route and re-signing him. But if they do, he will probably be the biggest chunk of cap space that they spend in-house will be to bring back Kaleb McGary. So that's a big one. Then we have sort of the contributors, like the guys that you definitely want to bring back that aren't necessarily going to break the bank. So first, Olamide Zaccheaus, probably the most expensive one. He's just 26. I think he's a quality wide receiver 3. And he's probably going to be in about that $4 million a year ballpark. Maybe you lower that a little bit in terms of cap hit if you spread it out over a few seasons or whatever, but that's about what I think he's going to get. Rashaan Evans, if they want to bring him back, I think he's going to get about $3 million a year, give or take. So that's one to factor in. Lorenzo Carter, the edge rusher, I do think he's worth bringing back as a versatile guy. tight end Michael Pruitt, the new unicorn, according to Aaron Freeman. I do really like Michael Pruitt. I think he's just a rock solid tight end too for this team. Clearly has good chemistry with Ritter. Clearly has good hands and is effective as a red zone weapon, which the Falcons really need. I would re-sign him to a $3 million a year contract, maybe for 2 more years, without question. Maybe he even gets a little bit more than that. But I think he's a great fit here. He's a good blocker. I think you re-sign him and you solidify your tight end position with him and Parker Hesse and John Fitzpatrick, who didn't actually play this year, but he's still in house. So I think if you re-sign Michael Pruitt, you sort of solved your tight end position. You don't really need to make any more moves there. It's well worth the $3 million in my opinion. Bradley Pinion, the punter, great year. Same age as Younghoe Koo. I would lock him up long term. He's probably going to be in about that $2.5 to $3 million ballpark as well. The other one to consider is cornerback Isaiah Oliver, probably also in that $2.5 million a year range. Started to play better towards the end of the season. Started to get some safety reps. Didn't have a great year overall, but I think worth re-signing to see. Maybe bring him back on a 1-year deal again, and we'll see how it goes. But if you add all that stuff up and you factor in the top 51 rule that I mentioned earlier, the approximate total for signing all of these guys to the deals that I have listed here is about $35 million, give or take. So we're just going to go with that because it's a nice round number. So you have to take that money into account to bring in all these guys back. That's going to cost the Falcons about $35 million. So at that point, when you bring those guys back, costing about $35 million, you subtract that from the potential cap space that the Falcons could have of $73.65, and you get about $39 million cap space remaining, which again is a very good number, and that's money that you can use to bring in external free agents. That's more than enough to bring in several big name guys. That's a Jesse Bates, for instance, several defensive linemen, perhaps an outside linebacker, perhaps a corner. They could bring in a lot of sort of more depth, high-end depth guys, or, like mid-range starter type guys. They could go a lot of different ways with that money. And that, how they finagle some of these deals, they could get some cap hits down and squeeze more guys in this year. Or they could try to pay out more money this year and sign fewer guys. It's all on the table, but I do think at the end of the day, they're going to be working with about $39 million in signing external guys, which again is a lot of money. It gives them plenty of options for free agency. It gives them plenty of options for extending their own guys. And depending on the decisions they make, depending on the players they do bring back or resign, or they will have a lot of opportunity to maneuver and improve the roster throughout. And I think that this is going to be a very different offseason than we've been used to in recent years with the Falcons having all of this space. They'll basically have the ability to bring back anyone they want on their roster and then go out and get potentially some really key free agent additions. I would sort of caution people that I don't believe they're likely to do like huge, more than one big signing. I think it's probably going to be more of those like 5 to 10 million signings, like several of those plus maybe one big name guy. And I know right now I have Jesse Bates circled as the big name guy, but I'm sure a lot of teams would like to sign Jesse Bates. So we'll see how high the bidding goes for his services. But I do think that this is a good situation for the Falcons. They'll have a lot of money at their disposal. They'll have a lot of options to bring back their own players and, of course, to get in some external guys. And, of course, the draft is another big factor. This factors in, being able to sign all their draft picks. And it's also important to note that the Falcons generally are one of the more cautious teams, I think, when it comes to keeping cap space in reserve. Though they do have that $39 million number to play around with, but they're probably going to keep 5 to 10 million of that in reserve. So, you could try to maximize it with your deals if you want, but they are likely to save some of that for the season if they need to make any trades or make any emergency moves to give themselves more flexibility. They've done that in each of their 2 years. They haven't spent down to the wire. I think they are likely to continue to do that. So factor that into your calculations as well. But certainly a very healthy financial situation when you have this much space, you can use it to either maximize your roster by maxing out all these contracts and pushing money into the future and all these things, or you can use it to keep a healthy financial situation going forward by front-loading deals and giving yourself future flexibility. I sort of think that the Falcons are more likely to do the latter and front-load stuff and not, and give them more flexibility in future seasons as opposed to really trying to maximize the cap space right now. But we'll see. We'll see what this front office and coaching staff decide to do now that they actually have money. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, for sure. But guys, that's going to wrap us up today. We got through all those numbers in 20 minutes. I'm impressed. Don't want to overload you with too much more. I'm going to be going through each position group on the Falcons roster, talking about which guys the Falcons might re-sign, how big the need is there, along with some potential free agent additions, some guys that I might like in the draft. And we'll be doing that over the next few weeks. It's going to be mostly Senior Bowl stuff for a few weeks as well, coming out on this channel. So we'll get a good mix of draft and free agency stuff here as we get closer and closer to the All-Star circuit and, of course, to free agency kicking off in early March. So, guys, thanks again for watching. Please do like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Leave that 5-star review if you're listening to the podcast audio. Those really help us out, help the show grow. So thank you so much for taking the time. Like I said, I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. You can follow me there for takes. Go to thefalcoholic.com for all that tremendous written content as well. And if you're so inclined, you can follow our Patreon and support us on a monthly basis to patreon.com/FalcoholicLive. You can check out the Discord. The link is right there. And yeah, we really appreciate everyone for watching today. We will see you guys next time on the Falcoholic Live, which will be still on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern during the off season. So until next time, guys, have a great day. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the Falcoholic Podcast.